Good morning and welcome to this press conference for the Orizzonti program we just screened now here in Sala Perla. It's my pleasure to welcome the guest for the first two short films we saw in the program. Unfortunately, Andrew Cotting will join us later in the afternoon, so he will be here for the press conference later on. So from my right, for start, we have Mattias Gustafsson, the director of the film, and Jimmy Lagnefors, the author of the music and the soundtrack. And beside my colleague Paolo Bertolini, who's co-moderating with me this press conference, the director of All the Lines Flow Out, Charles Lim Yong. We are going to have a conversation with you, and I hope also amongst us. And to start it off, as usual, for the first question here from the table will be from Mattias, and the first curiosity about this film is that you were interested in video gaming, or you were a heavy gamer yourself, and you kind of transported this vision into this piece of work of yours.
Well, I don't actually play video games myself that much. I have a brother, my little brother. He plays a lot, and he also plays the leading character in the film. And so I used to look at him playing video games, and certain video games have a very interesting point of view, I found, where you're locked with the character running around in the universe that's been created, and I just felt like that was such an interesting way to identify with a character and do it, and also telling a story, which obviously in a video game it's interactive. You tell the story, but I was interested in trying to tell a story with that sort of type of identification with the character, where the audience member sort of becomes the character, but then they can't control him anyway. So I just felt that was something I've never really seen in the movies before, and I felt that was something I wanted to tell that way. There was a story that I felt could be told that way. So that was the start of it. That came actually before the story.
And you never thought about recreating like a digital imagery environment, or using CGI to enter the universe? You really wanted to bring, most of all, the main thing was the point of view, and to bring it out in the real world somehow. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, the whole point of it was to differentiate it from video games, to make it sort of like if you were out in the real world, in the woods or in the city or wherever, and still had this point of view, what would that look like? Because even though video games, obviously, they're really detailed these days, but they can't really have the amount of details that you can have just with a regular consumer camera, basically. So I felt that you could definitely, there was definitely an interesting contrast between that type of point of view that resembles a video game point of view, and the real world look and feel of it that you get from a regular camera. So I was never really thinking about emulating that type of look. I wanted to go as far away as possible from it, I guess, even.
And talking about point of view, I think it's interesting, because we have a few points in common, I think, through the two films. Not just point of view, but also somehow the subject of escaping or running up. So maybe we can, Paul, if you want to have a question for if we can ask Charles.
Maybe in regard to the theme of escaping, actually, I know that Charles' film, despite being so conceptual, is actually inspired by some real episode that regarded a real life character in Singapore. Can you tell us something about the inspiration you had for this film, and perhaps also about the controversy surrounding this character? Because I know this film was first an installation, and then you reworked the material into a short film that could be shown outside of Singapore because of the controversy that surrounds this character. So maybe this thematic input for your film could be something to start with.
Yes, actually, when I first started this project, it was, interestingly, it was not for a video installation at all. It was actually a reaction to an event in Singapore we have this secret prison. It's called Whitney Detention Barracks, actually, in Singapore, where people get arrested and then they get put inside there, and there's no trial for them, actually, under this thing called ISA, Internal Security Act, which is something that was kind of left in Singapore from the colonial days, from the British. I think Malaysia has the same law also. And what happened was that there was this, actually this prison is supposed to be secret, and people are not supposed to know about it. And then, but what happened was that this prison came to light because somebody escaped from this prison. And this person's name is Mas Salamat. And what happened was that he escaped from this prison, and then suddenly there was this prison was kind of like brought to light in Singapore, and then during that period of time, actually, a lot of the police and the army, everybody was mobilized to look for this person in the forest, in the drains, in all the nooks and crannies of like Singapore, actually. So what happened was that this story kind of, this event actually gave me the impetus to look into the drains. So actually, I went like exploring the drains actually, and without any idea of making a film or making an artwork actually. So actually, this started about 2 years ago, and when I was in there, I kind of like found the things that I found. So I was wondering, all these people searching for him, and they didn't find him. In the end, actually, he escaped. So I was just thinking, like, maybe they found something else, actually. So this work was kind of like exploration. And I was thinking about it also, it's kind of interesting because the drainage system, the canal systems in Singapore, it's a form of, for the city, it's a form of expelling the water also, of something that's, when there's too much of it, it comes out. So it's interesting that the person used these systems to escape, yeah.
Well, the notion of escape, as Sergio just said, traverses both films. It's a physical escape from a real space, but it's also an escape into a space that becomes imaginary and not necessarily connected to the real. I wanted to ask both directors about their idea of this travelogue that the characters traverse in their films. I mean, whether in the case of Charles, maybe it's also presenting a new point of view, a new view over the city of Singapore. Perhaps in start it's something more conceptual, but it also presents a specific reality of landscape. What is your relationship with the notion of escape, especially in connection with the space you're presenting in your films? Whoever wants to start.
Actually, in context of Singapore, it's quite interesting because actually we live in an island. It's very much like Venice. But interestingly, actually, the people who live in Singapore, when we live in Singapore, we don't really think of Singapore as an island. We have been kind of disconnected from the sea. Because actually, I think in the 70s, actually, what happened was that the government of Singapore, they took away all the properties of people that live along the coast. And it became like government property. So what happened is that life and coast water was disconnected actually. So what happened was that one thing I found quite interesting was that when I walk around Singapore, I see people staring into canals, looking at the drains actually. And I was thinking like maybe that's a kind of like a reminder to them of the outside actually, in that sense that there's a boundary, yeah. So,
but in a way you are also presenting Singapore from a different point of view, because we see the city through the canals at the level of water, and also the space of Singapore becomes the theater for some imagination, for some fantasy. Actually, this also happens in Start. I mean, these very typical Nordic landscape are the theater for some kind of almost extraterrestrial or video game-like interactions. This is something that happens in your film as well. I mean, the moment where the searchers are looking for, this for this jailbird who managed to escape. It becomes something like sci-fi, actually.
I can expand on that also. One thing I found interesting was that when in the canals, actually, when you're moving along the canals, is that you have this space that's completely foreign to the people that live, like say, in Singapore. But the interesting thing is that you have this juxtaposition of sound of the city from above, actually. So you have this space that's totally foreign, it looks like almost like dead and uninhabitable, no people at all. But then on top of it, you have this kind of like almost like a voice-over narrative of the city, kind of like moving on top, actually. So I find that quite interesting.
Since we were on the issue of sound, now maybe I have a question about Starter and the soundtrack of Starter. And if there was also a reference for the soundtrack to video games, except for this sampling of this honking that reminds the character, let's say, of this threat that is following. But also, if you were also interested in the kind of music and sound that is used in games, or you were also looking for a different experience and to add to the visual.
Well, the music and the sound, they're sort of blended together. Sorry, they're sort of blended together. And you could say that Mattias made all the noises and ugly sounds, and I made the music. And sometimes they intertwine. But I never played a video game in my whole life, so I don't know anything about it. But I just love the concept of Start as a movie, and I tried to interpret it, what happened there. So.
Yeah, I think the video game aspect of it was just kind of the springboard for it, and then we sort of looked at it as a drama, as a narrative drama, and try to make as a exciting film as possible. So I think with the music, I didn't really, urge him to go that route, but I did urge him to, as you say, kind of let the music and the sound be intertwined. Sometimes you don't really know what's what. But yeah, not necessarily because I wanted to sort of reference video games now.
And talking about some visual formal aspects in both films, I have a question for both of you. In the case of Charles, I would be interested in knowing about this format you choose, because actually with digital video and with HD digital video, filmmakers and artists have the chance to choose whatever format they like. I mean, since it's not a matter of masking a screening or whatever. So it's quite striking to me that usually nobody is doing it, but this was a very interesting example that you took this very wide format, and that was the question for you. And while the question for Mattias would be, how, I mean, the film is extremely formally controlled in light, color, I mean, how did you control that when I guess most of the time the camera was not close to your view? I mean, how you could plan it in advance, what was going to be in the frame and the way it was going to look like when the camera, I think, was up there, back on the actor?
Well, that's a good question. I don't really know how I did it. Well, as you said, we had the camera on a rig, so every shot in the film is from this rig that the actor is wearing, and it's about a 2.5, 3 meter long steel rig with the camera on top of it. And I mean, it was just a matter of the craft of it, I guess, to just know all these little things about how you make things sit together, and also with this kind of visual design, I realized quite early that you can kind of cut, any shot against each other, because you're always gonna search for his head, I think, as a viewer. So as long as the head is kind of in the same spot in the frame, then the rest of the frame can be jumping around like crazy. You'll still kind of feel like you know what's going on, and that kind of created a great energy, I thought. And that was something that we kind of realized during, doing it. So it was very much an experiment that way. And also talking about this sort of using different kind of cameras. I mean, we basically used the consumer camera, they are very good today, I guess, depending on how you use them. I mean, he used the consumer camera and made it look like IMAX. I mean, that was crazy. I could not believe that it was shot on that. But I was, the reason I made that choice because I needed a lightweight camera for the rig. So that was, I mean, I would have loved to shoot it on film, I guess, but so it kind of gives you more opportunities, this development that we're seeing these days.
Yeah, it's interesting that about the way you shot using the rig, because for me also when I first started shooting, I started with a 5D Mark II actually, and then when I was shooting it, actually I was not happy with it, and then I actually got a cheaper camera to shoot the thing, so I went down. I downgraded actually to upgrade. It's kind of interesting, and it's interesting also because in my movie I don't have the person in the center for the eye to fix. So it's very important that the movement was smooth actually throughout. So and I didn't. The budget was low also. So what we did was that we just got an inflatable boat and we got 2 pieces of rope to pull, with 2 people pulling it, and it's just a matter of getting the coordination and coordination correct, and then after a while it becomes smooth also.
And what about the aspect ratio of the film, this extremely wide format? Could you just tell us about that?
Yeah, what happened was that I started this project about 2 years ago, and I first started 16:9, and then what happened was that I shot actually over like a month of footage, and then after I went back to look at it, and I was like, oh, it's not working at all. I think I need to reshoot the whole thing. So what I did was that I went to look for an anamorphic lens. It's just a consumer lens that was made in the 70s. It's called Isorama. So I used that lens to put on top of my old lens. And then so what happened was when I was shooting the footage, it was with a squeezed image actually. So what happened was that I went into post-production and unsqueezed it. Yeah. It's
And then you cropped it as well, or did it actually squeeze to that?
And then I cropped it, and I actually it was 2:35, and then I cropped it some more, so I letterboxed it. Yeah.
I have a question again for both directors, because in both cases, as we were saying, the films have some kind of conceptual nature. In the case of Charles, he said that this film is actually the result of a process that lasts for 2 years or so, 3 years even. So my question is, in the case of films like yours, where you have a structure that is quite defined when you actually see the film, I wonder whether the film responds to a choice of writing at the beginning, because I'm thinking, was there much writing, much conceptualization of the film before actually shooting, or was it something that developed throughout the process itself? I mean, I guess this is interesting in both cases, because it's not narrative, and the relationship between writing, shooting, and editing might be something different from what we usually expect from short films that are more narrative.
I think the advantage of the kind of setup I have is because I shot the film, I edited. So what happens is that I don't really bother so many people when I'm making this project actually. So what happens is that I have, the work I initially had a conceptual idea, and then I go there and I shoot, and then I come back and I look at it, and actually sometimes the work becomes something else actually, and then it's kind of like speaking to me, and then in a way I have to kind of like destroy the initial concept that I have and actually find what other concepts are there inside, and then I move forward actually.
Well, for me, I think I did write the screenplay, and that I felt was kind of narrative. I mean, it looked kind of like a regular screenplay. I think it was sort of like a basic chase film. But of course, as you start shooting it, and you know, because I wanted to represent all 4 seasons, I was shooting it for a whole year, you know, one day here and then wait for a month and then shoot one day here. And so of course things evolved during that process, and so the editing was actually not what I was used to, because I'm kind of used to editing sort of what you've written and shot. And with this process I found that I could have made a feature easily with the kind of footage that I had, but it probably wouldn't have been the best format for it, but I could have. So yeah, I had to take a couple of stabs at the editing to kind of find its form. That was really the difficult part, to kind of find what I actually had written, basically, to kind of find that tone and that tempo.
And talking about the narrative of Start, it starts out actually with something that might look ironic or funny, just stealing this candy, and then the film grows into having this really scary and feeling, I mean, towards this final clash of the two characters. So I would like to ask you how much, since this is clearly the aim of the film to go towards that, why you choose this small happenings like a starting point?
Well, I think because what I wanted to do was to deal with fear. I mean, that's kind of the theme of the entire film, and the kind of fear that interests me is those sort of irrational fears that I think we all have, that kind of block us in our daily life, and we don't really know where they come from, but they're kind of always there. So I wanted to represent an irrational fear, and so this to me represented that, because it was kind of just so weird that he would get chased for doing such a small little thing, as you say, stealing a little piece of a candy bar and getting chased by the store clerk. And not only that, you know, the chase continuing out further and further away, and, you know, spring, summer, autumn, winter. And so that was kind of the base of it, making something really irrational to sort of represent what I think we're all, well, at least I think I go through in my daily life, and how you kind of confront that was kind of what the film was all about, I guess. And that was also the thing to make it sort of start out like a video game a little bit. He steals something and then he runs away, sort of like you do in the video games, and nothing really means anything. You can do kind of what you want. And of course, the more time passes by, the more real it gets in a way. And that's kind of I guess in a way, the reason why the character is able to confront his fears in the end, because he kind of realized that he can exist in the real world. He doesn't have to exist in the video game world, sort of sitting at home playing video games. And so that kind of all tied together that way, I guess.
And those marks we see on the skin of the characters in the last shot, is actually the marks left by wearing the rig, or is just my idea about it?
I don't think it is even. I remember we discussed it. I don't think we know where they came from, but they kind of worked, because I wanted him to look really rugged in the end when he takes his shirt off, and, you know, you want to feel like he's been out there for a year and he's all pale, and, you know, so that they worked really well for the shot. But I think it was just more or less a happy accident. Yeah.
I wanted to ask Mattias what I asked to Charles earlier about the notion of escape, and especially in relation within the nature you are depicting in the film as also a theater for some kind of visionary or fantastic action towards the end of the film. Can you comment on that?
Well, I think the idea of making it real for the characters I was talking about, I wanted to have him go from being this ordinary kid who plays video games to it's sort of a coming of age thing, to an adult. And I wanted to take him to an environment that is so far away from the regular teenage environment, sitting at home in your bed playing video games. And so I wanted to take him out into nature, basically. I mean, sort of kind of a primal thing that way. And sort of have him deal with things that he doesn't have a clue about, because he's a regular city kid teenager. So I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but and then of course I wanted to deal with, in the end there in the woods, with how he actually comes to terms with, you know, coming of age and being, you know, confronting his fears, and then I sort of wanted to, well, because what I wanted to do from the start was to do something that, if you looked at it, it's totally real. Everything that happened could happen exactly like that. You know, he finds stuff to eat, and he's being chased, and the guy chasing him is also finding stuff to eat or whatever. They could do that for a whole year, but the fact that they do it for a whole year makes it surreal. And that was kind of one of the, I wanted to have that surreal sort of layer under there. I wanted to feel very real and very sort of down to earth and very matter of fact. But if you start thinking about it sort of one step further, of course, you'll find the surrealism in it. And that's kind of what I wanted to play on in the end of it, when suddenly you go from it being winter to summer in one go, and he's sort of, the ice disappears underneath and he drops into the water. That was kind of the, you know, that's the only time I wanted this surreal sort of, the ideology of the film to sort of come out in the end, because then you don't have to, because I didn't want to, you know, I didn't want to have that come out too early, because I wouldn't find that very interesting myself, actually. I wanted it to feel very down to earth and very matter of fact, and then in the end sort of play on the symbolism of it, basically.
I have a question for Charles. One of the most mysterious moments to me in the film is when this voice comes up and this house on the river, because at that point you have the feeling that you made some sense of also the narrative, which is the film is somehow displaying, and then everybody escaping probably is escaping to go back to a place, a home, or something that means something to him. So suddenly we see this house on the river, and this voice, which seems to be not related to the possible narrative we figure out. Can you just comment on this part of the film, please?
Actually, in the film, when you see the last part with the house, when you're coming in, actually, it was a house which I discovered when I was doing another project called Sea State 1, Inside Outside, an art project, actually, where I went around the border of Singapore, and you know, every time I found something that was floating along the border, I would take 2 pictures, one from inside Singapore and one from outside. Our border is in the water, so I had to be in the water. So what happened was that when I was going around to the north side of Singapore, to my surprise, actually, I found somebody living in a house in the sea, which was something that I thought that was completely disappeared, actually, because, you know, the government had taken away all the land. And what happened was that I approached the house, and then I found that there was this person living in there. But actually, the person has since passed away, and the house has been taken back by the government. So what happened was that I went there and I did an interview with the wife of the owner of the house. And then she kind of like, I have 1 hour's worth of interviews, actually, of footage, audio footage of interviews of her. And then there was a part of it where she just talks about the house, experience of living in this house. So to me, it's like this is the voice is like the last person living on the border in Singapore, and I wanted to put something there right at the end.
But in this sense, this part, which, as Sergio said, has some kind of more documentary quality to it, it's also the last stop of your trip through Singapore, from the jail, through the canals to the sea, bringing back some memory of a reality that has been erased as well. Would you say it's like that?
Yes. Actually, when I edit in this footage, a lot of my producer, actually, Leon, who's not here with me, he was really, really against it. He's like, no, you shouldn't put it in, you shouldn't put this person in. And to me was that, I don't know, I felt some sort of, sometimes you're making art and, you want it to look nice and conform to a thing. But then sometimes you want to make it and give it a kick, actually. And I felt that, to me, I felt that at that point in time, because it was actually, initially this thing was video installation in Singapore, and I felt that people in Singapore needed to know about this house, needed to know about this memory that had disappeared, actually. So yeah, it's in there.
Well, yeah, perhaps our time is up, so we should wrap it up here. Thanks a lot to all our distinguished guests, and thanks a lot to you for staying for this press conference.